Welcome to Let's Locums. This is Mark Royer. I'm an ear, nose, and throat surgeon and locum tenens physician. I'm here today with a special guest. Dr. Daniel Shin is a board-certified urologic surgeon, real estate investor, and educator dedicated to accelerating financial independence for professionals. Currently, he spends his clinical time as a locum tenens physician, dedicating the remainder of his time to real estate investments in his real estate investment company, Serious Real Estate. Dr. Shin shares his experiences and insights on his blog, The Darwinian Doctor, aiming to empower others to take control of their financial destinies. His mission is to help others achieve financial freedom, enabling them to live life on their own terms. Daniel, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thanks, Mark. Yeah, I'm happy to be here.
So I'd love if we could get started by hearing about your journey.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the journey for my career started out very similar to a lot of new physicians, but I grew up in a first-generation immigrant family in New Jersey, and it was a very typical upbringing to start. We're in one of those New Jersey suburbs that is almost like a suburb of New York City. I remember for the first part of my childhood there, it was a very idyllic upbringing. We would do all the things that you would expect a middle-class family would do in the suburbs of New Jersey. But the thing that really changed for me and which I think drove a lot of my later interests into investing and financial freedom was that it was somewhere around middle school where I remember that the financial state of our family changed, and we went from being very comfortable to this point where we were getting all these strange phone calls from what I understand now are sort of debt collectors. It sort of culminated around middle school, where one weekend my mom said, we have to pack everything up. And we, in the course of one weekend, packed everything up into a U-Haul and drove it across town to a rental home because we had lost our home, basically. So that sparked a few years, certainly through middle school and into high school, where things were really financially insecure. I knew that education was going to be a way to really move forward and come out of this time of financial scarcity, because I knew that a good education meant that there would be opportunities later on. So that's what sort of led me into going for medical school, which I did at the University of Pittsburgh. And then towards the third-year rotations, I just randomly rotated through urology and had a great time. There were some really great urologists that I interacted with. And that led to a residency at the University of Southern California in Los Angeles. And then I took an employed position, as many of us are doing nowadays, with the Kaiser organization. And then, theoretically, I had achieved all my goals, right? I had achieved becoming a physician. And not only that, I was going to be a physician in a fairly highly paid specialty. But it was only a couple of years into that where I sort of took a breath, looked around, and I was comfortable with my job. I was good at my job, well liked by my peers. But I also saw some cracks in U.S. healthcare. I had some worries about where it was headed. And I also felt like there needed to be something else. I was asking myself, what is next for me? And for me, I decided that was going to be trying to achieve financial independence. And that's how I got into investing and real estate.
When did you make your first real estate investment? And was that your first actual kind of intentional decision to work on pursuing financial freedom?
My first foray into investing, sort of on an active level, was via stocks, because I think that seems to be the, quote, traditional way of investing, and it's the most accessible. Around that second year mark as an attending, when I was looking around and feeling like I had larger goals, I was listening to tons and tons of podcasts, personal finance, investing, because I had a 1-hour commute. The thing that really swayed me to real estate was that I realized that there was a subsection of people who were getting to financial freedom that seemed to be getting there much faster than the traditional route. And they were generally real estate investors. So I set aside about $100,000 of money that I had invested in stocks and luckily did okay. So I used that to buy a single family home in Birmingham. That was my first purchase.
Your blog, The Darwinian Doctor, is amazing. When we started looking into investing, I started finding this blog by this anonymous doctor, the Darwinian Doctor, I'm curious to know how long after you started purchasing those homes did you start the Darwinian Doctor blog?
It was actually pretty simultaneous. And, the reason why I was anonymous at first is that I wanted a little bit of separation between my day-to-day practice as a physician. I thought that it would be easier for me to write about these personal topics if my face wasn't on there. And I eventually did write about my identity a few years into the blog. And I really think that was actually a good thing because it put a face behind my writing. And I think it allowed me to connect a lot more with my readers.
As I've followed your career and journey, you've expanded beyond just doing this excellent blog to you're now doing some syndicates, some real estate syndicates that actually I've personally invested in, and it's called Sirius Real Estate. Would you mind sharing a little bit about Sirius?
Yeah, absolutely. So Cereus Real Estate, Cereus, it's a name of a cactus in the southwestern part of the U.S. I started Cereus Real Estate because, I've been writing now on the blog and documenting my own real estate journey, which eventually encompassed almost 30 units of rental property. And I think it was very inspiring to a lot of people who have gone on to invest themselves into real estate. However, I did understand at a certain point, I realized that probably 95% of my readers, they were interested in investing in real estate and getting on that path to financial freedom, but they didn't have the bandwidth and just weren't able to go ahead and do what I did, which is purchase it themselves. And eventually I started renovating properties myself with my team and then getting property management in place, leasing them out, dealing with the aftermath of that. But they still wanted to invest in real estate. So there are avenues to do that, which is essentially pooled investments called syndication. So Sirius Real Estate started out earlier in 2024 as an opportunity for high-income professionals to invest into assets like real estate in a passive manner. And I look forward to basically bringing this type of opportunity to more and more physicians and medical professionals, because I do think, really the guiding principle behind it is that I think that financial empowerment brings empowerment to all other parts of your life. So one of the problems I see in medicine these days is that as physicians have become more and more employed, we're losing autonomy and power. One of the ways that physicians are going to regain power is by being financially savvy. And, I've spoken to so many physicians and medical professionals who have been able to make a lot of changes in their practice and in their lives. But to do something like that, I really think it helps to be in a position of financial strength. And that's what I hope to deliver through things like Sirius Real Estate.
One thing I really like about it is, as someone who has not really invested in real estate before, it's a very nice way to educate yourself, but to do it in an incremental way. I'm thrilled that you're doing that, and I wish you the best of luck, especially with the Hampton Meadows renovations and
Absolutely.
leasing out.
And that's, our interests are very aligned on that, I think.
So, yeah, for sure. So you were a urologic surgeon, Southern California, hour commute each way, started investing in real estate, started the blog, Darwinian Doctor, and then you made a transition and you're a little bit closer to where we are now in the Midwest in Indiana. And then with that came what I'm really looking forward to deep diving with you is some locums work.
Absolutely. Yeah. So these days I live in Memphis, Tennessee, and I practice medicine as a locum tenens. And the way that I split my time now, it's approximately 25% of the month, about a week a month now, practicing as a locum tenens. And the rest of the time I work on Sirius Real Estate, the Darwinian Doctor blog, and the content production of that, and, trying to work on my own portfolio as well. So I've compartmentalized my time in a way that is still pretty new to me, but it's been about 2 years now that I've been working like this.
So when you were making that leap 2 years ago, where did you first start looking for locums assignments? How did you choose the sites and the agency to work with?
So basically, the way it worked is that it had gotten to a point in Southern California where I knew something had to change because I had the full-time job, I had the commute, I wasn't seeing my kids that often because, I was essentially in the car, in the mornings and in the evenings. And I also had the social media stuff, and I also had the investments. So I knew that something had to change. I wasn't exactly sure how it was going to change, but then my wife got recruited to a really cool job here in Memphis. When we landed here, we decided it was going to be amazing for her career. I clearly wanted to change. So we made the transition. And I talked to the private practices in town, which are excellent. But we eventually figured out that what I wanted may not be feasible within the confines of a private practice, which is essentially I wanted to be able to do urology and medicine part-time. But then locum tenens offers that opportunity in a very, very flexible way. When I decided that I was going to be doing locum tenens, it was actually pretty easy to get started and looking for positions because, number one, as we know, there's a doctor shortage. So,
especially in urology, those surgery subspecialties particularly, yeah.
So for better, for worse, there's tons of need for doctors across the nation, especially in what I would call potentially underserved areas. So what I found is that I didn't see as much need in, say, Los Angeles or New York or San Francisco, but you go an hour or two outside of all the major cities, and there's these deserts of care where people cannot access urology services. They can't access ENT services. And what they generally have to do at these hospitals, if they don't have someone to come in and help them with that need, they just put the person in an ambulance and send them to the ER, to the big city. But so for the hospitals, they advertise and hope to find someone to come and help them with coverage and with seeing consults in the ER and all these things. So I essentially just started returning the phone calls from all of the locum tenens companies that we all get as physicians.
The 100 you get in a week.
Right. And, it's annoying until it's not. And then I started returning the emails and the phone calls, started having these conversations with recruiters, and then it was just a matter of filtering the opportunities.
So what's a little wild to me about your story, but unfortunately pretty common, is you're in Memphis. There are presumably, there are ENT practices, a number of ENT practices, probably a number of hospitals that are recruiting. And you're essentially saying, hey, look, I am a board certified urologic surgeon. I can come and work, but because of how I want to practice, these things that I have going on, I don't want to work the traditional 60-hour work week. And I would like to do maybe a week a month or something similar to that. And you weren't really able to get anywhere with that, it sounds like, which is unfortunately very common. You have a doctor that's in the town. Why should that doctor need to travel out of state? I know what I hear from other docs who try to work out these same direct contracting deals, and which I always encourage docs to do if they can, is to do kind of what you tried to set up in Memphis. But what was the main pushback or reasons that you think something wasn't able to be worked out for you to be able to kind of just set up a part-time gig like that? I'm going to work a week a month in the town that I live.
Yeah, I did have those conversations with the practices themselves. So there are a few dominant private practices here, and there's an academic practice at the university. And I did have those conversations, and we worked out numbers. We put pen to paper, and it didn't seem like it was going to be financially compensated to a level that I wanted, basically. And the thing about it is that, at least for urology, and it might be totally different for ENT or primary care, but the thing that I can provide at, say, Ohio, where I ended up for the past year, is different than I think what the need is here. So I think my highest and best use as a urologist is offloading a lot of the call responsibilities from the local urologists where I help out in Ohio right now. And that's because I'm coming in for a discrete amount of time, and I'm willing to give up some sleep during that time and work really hard and provide sort of a bit of relief to the local urologists. That wasn't really as necessary here. So it wasn't that, I think it wasn't as valuable to the practices here because, the sense that I got was that, yes, call is hard here as well, but they were willing to shoulder that. They felt that the compensation was pretty good. So it wasn't to the point where I would be able to negotiate the salary that I wanted just for a week a month here. So that's basically how I ended up looking outwards.
Call to them, either they were compensated well for it or they weren't on call as frequently. So this is how we started our ENTlocums.com originally, was we were providing ENTs to go to these smaller towns, groups of 3 or 4 docs who needed call coverage, and we'd have a doc that would come in for a week, and they would love that, right? Because then they're able to not get interrupted in the middle of a clinic day to see some emergency or consult in the ER. They would be able to have a weekend off, just really improve their quality of life. But I found the same things for me and T, like a big city, usually they're larger groups. Usually they've got better call compensation. So if they're on call more frequently, they're at least getting well compensated for that. And oftentimes when you have an overworked group of 3 or 4 docs, they'd much rather just have the time off than make some extra money. So it sounds like that's kind of what you found to be the case as well with what you're doing in Ohio. Can you just walk us through a typical locums assignment? Like, what's a typical locums day like for you?
Sure. So usually I'm flying out the evening before because I start early. I travel the day before and I get there in the evening. I settle into a hotel. And then the morning when I wake up, my phone is on and receiving consults as early as 6 a.m. I head to the hospital at 7 and I want to be available on site in case there are any emergencies in the OR. They can't get the Foley catheter in, so they call urology or something like that. And I meet with the mid-level provider and NP there and go over the list. So this is a list of the inpatients. This is a list of the services that have requested urologic consults overnight that have been held until the morning. There might be a couple of patients in the ER that have been waiting around to see me as well. So I'll go over the list with the nurse practitioner and we'll go around and see all the new consults. We'll see the inpatients as well. And then afterwards, it's taking care of any add-on surgeries that might have resulted from the consults. It's following up on studies. It's seeing all the new consults that come in during the day. And then that generally takes the day. So it's really a combination of seeing the inpatient service, seeing the consults, any emergencies that arise. And then usually it does finish up, around somewhere between 3 and 5 p.m. And then I'm on call for the rest of the evening. And depending on the emergencies that come in, maybe that means coming back to the hospital. Maybe it means talking to consultants, approving transfers, and then rinse and repeat the next day.
So this sounds like a pretty busy assignment.
Yeah. And it can be busy. So when I was taking the position, they had placed some physicians there before, so they knew that it could be very busy. I had a frank conversation where that if I'm going to be getting on a plane and going somewhere, I wanted it to be well compensated. So that well compensated roles tend to be busier and they tend to lump a lot of responsibilities on you. And they tend to be fairly heavy in terms of the call responsibilities. I knew what I was getting into. But luckily, I'm still young, I'm early in my practice, and I'm energetic and well-trained, so I can take care of it.
So how does the compensation structure work?
I've seen a variety of compensation structures in the different roles that I've evaluated, but generally, it seems like the most common model is a flat rate for a day of call coverage, and then an overtime rate if you get called back to the hospital, essentially.
And then will you be staying in Ohio or are you going to a different state?
So I would say one of the downsides of locum tenens is that it might not be a permanent gig. So that hospital that has a need in January may not have that need in November. And the hospital where I was helping out in Ohio, they had a problem where part of their department essentially got poached by another hospital in the area. So they went from this perfectly normal situation of 4 full-time urologists to all of a sudden just having 2, and that's why they brought in locum tenens to help with that need. They have a really large catchment area, so that not only is it one main hospital, but they have multiple satellites that'll refer sort of patients for specialist care to the main hospital. So needless to say, they did need the help. But in the meantime, they've staffed up, and now they have a pretty robust group of urologists that are employed there on a more full-time basis. So they don't need me anymore after December. So next week I'm heading back there, but that'll be the last shift. And starting in January, I'll be starting in a hospital in Illinois. And the things that you really have to do when you're starting over in a new hospital are you have to think about licensing and you have to think about hospital credentialing. I mean, those, as you know, those are the real time-intensive things in the beginning. So when I knew that I would likely be headed to Illinois, I made sure to renew my compact license. And then through that, I was able to get Illinois licensing fairly easily. And
then the compact license, for those who may not know, is a license that essentially allows you very quick quickly to have access to practice in a number of states. Did you set that up when you were in Tennessee, or did you start that when you were in California?
In Tennessee, actually. Think of the compact license almost like a common application where you can use your credentials and certification in your sort of sponsor state to essentially streamline an application to another state. And over the past few years that I've been looking at this, more and more states are joining in this compact system, which actually is amazing because one of the frustrations that I have about medical licensing in this country is that it's so compartmentalized. And and this allows you to more quickly, it's not immediate, but more quickly get licensed in, I think up to 40 plus states are now part of the compact.
Like you said, it's rapidly increasing, which is only a good thing for us as physicians. And you hit on what I think is probably one of the main downsides of someone who's looking to do locums as their main clinical practice. And that's the fact that locum tenens is typically something that hospitals do not want to have to use. And so from almost the moment you get there, regardless of your docs you're working with love you, right? Regardless of how they feel about the situation or the staff, how much they enjoy having you, what they're really trying to do is either recruit a new partner in, or oftentimes it's hospitals that are trying to find docs to employ. And so these aren't necessarily going to be long-term gigs a lot of the time. Now, you were there a year, which I think is really impressive and speaks to how much they appreciated having you there. Does that worry you at all when you look ahead? I mean, you're in a unique situation in that I have a feeling, based on all of the other investments you've made, that you're probably practicing at this point mostly to keep up the skills and to provide care to these underserved areas. But I don't want to speak for you. But how do you process that fact? Like, okay, well, I'm done with this one. I'm going to Illinois. Where am I going to be mid 2025 or into 26?
Right. I think there's two ways of looking at it. I think you're right that for me, it's a little different because I have substantial, real estate investments, and I have a real estate investing company in Serious Real Estate. And I'm really excited about how that's going to expand in the future. But I think it's perfectly possible to, even as a younger physician with a family, to subsist on locum tenens income, solely. But you're right. I think when you're doing locum tenens, it's with the realization that you might be at a role for a particular amount of time, and then you might have to switch to a different role, and there might be a lag in between them. The thing that I think makes it possible is that generally, you're going to be looking at a fairly robust compensation structure as a locum tenens. And I think it reflects the supply and demand aspect of it. And it also reflects the fact that there's an inconvenience to traveling somewhere else to practice medicine. There's a significant switching cost when you start at a new location. You have to be really adaptable. It takes a slightly different skill set than if you're practicing the same place all the time. Oftentimes, you can beat your typical compensation by working as a locum tenens. And I think that gives you a little bit of an opportunity to build up a bit of a safety net, a financial safety net at least. So whereas I think most physicians, I would say it's good to have in your checking account at any given time, a good amount of capital, ideally something like 6 months. If you're going to be doing something like locum tenens, I think that's even more important to have that and to make sure that your living costs are going to be covered by liquidity that you have access to.
You talked about how the switching costs are quite high when you go from one site to another. Now, they'll typically pay for the orientation. Like, that's very standard, right? So you're like, you don't have to worry about productivity in most locums jobs, which is great. You're paid almost usually more or less hourly. And that would include orientation, being brought up to speed on a new site. But one of the things that I think is a big negative as well, and you touched on this earlier, is that when you switch, you do have new credentialing. Now, the compact license makes that a lot easier. The agency should really try to take a lot of that burden off of physicians and really try to minimize paperwork. But how much time would you estimate you spent before you started your first locums job, and then now when you're transitioning from Ohio to Illinois, in that kind of uncompensated time where you're responding to emails from the recruiter, from the hospital, you're getting documents together that maybe they had but needed to be updated? Have you thought about that, or do you have any estimate as far as how many hours you would be spending to make those switches?
Yeah, I've thought about it, and it's substantial. It's easier this time around because I am more organized about it, right? So I have a lot of this documentation from the last time around, and I have all of my dates of training and prior jobs and prior hospitals written down and accessible. But I would say, honestly, the first time that I went through it and was finding all of these documents and going through this process, honestly, maybe 50, 60 hours.
Yeah, Jesus.
I think it's hard to estimate, but it wasn't all at once. But over the course of weeks to months, because you're not the initial process talking to a locums company, you might just have a conversation and then it might be off to the races, or they might have a process where you have to submit all of your documentation and credentialing to them, and they create a file on you. And then the applying for medical licensing to a different state, it might be with a compact, it might not be, but you can remember when you had to do that, as a resident or whatever. It's quite arduous. A lot of the work is duplicative, where you have to send the same documents, and maybe they lose it. You have to send it again. It's a lot of contacting residency programs and hospitals for insurance companies to make sure that you have all the documentation. And then, after you get the job, then you have to deal with hospital credentialing, and it's pretty much the same thing all over again. So until I was able to get all the documentation together and get a little bit facile on that, it was quite arduous. And no matter how organized you are, you still have to get the documents and information into the proprietary forms that the hospital has. And a lot of it is really, really annoying, to be quite honest.
And that's one thing we really try to improve. And I have a particular disdain for that side of practicing medicine, is all of the paperwork and all of the forms and sending them again and again. I was talking to someone recently who, the locums lady, kind of travels around in an RV. She has PM&R. She has her own website, right? But then she has like an encrypted page. She works at multiple different sites with multiple different agencies and has all those documents on there. Someone can get a password and download what they need. I thought that was a creative way to handle that. I think the other negative is, while there's huge benefits in those 3 weeks you're there, you also have this week, I know you have kids, as do I, that you're just away. I mean, you're not going to see them at night. You're not going to, any events or activities they have going on, you're going to be missing. I'm curious how you handle that as a parent and a spouse.
Yeah, really, really good question. And I think it can be tough. So my kids are 7 and 10 years old, first grade and fourth grade, and they're really at a point in their lives where they notice when I'm gone. I think it would be different if they were 3 months old and 6 months old. And so I was sort of a face that kind of came and went, and, but I have a strong relationship with my kids. They definitely miss me. I miss them, and not to mention my wife. So, I think that it's definitely a downside that you're not around. The reason why I think it was a little bit easier for me to make that transition is because I felt like my quality of relationship with my kids was not that great in Southern California, because to get to work on time, I was leaving at 6 a.m. typically before they were really awake. And I was getting back home oftentimes at 7 p.m. after they had had dinner already. I'd missed the evening already, and they were getting ready for bed. Sometimes I would come back home and they'd be in bed already, asleep, And I still had call responsibilities in Southern California too, where because of that commute, I had to sleep oftentimes, at the hospitals. My wife doesn't like it. She works full time here, and 2 rambunctious kids, getting them washed and into PJs and into bed is a lot of work, right? And so I think she feels my absence when I'm gone. The thing that helps us is that my parents moved from Southern California to Memphis with us. So, they're really integral in childcare, and
preaching to the choir here, man. And those grandparents are something else, aren't they?
Yeah. And I honestly don't think that we could do it without them.
Yeah. Likewise.
We'd probably have to have an au pair or something like that. But, they really help out. And I feel comfortable knowing that my kids are being well taken care of by my parents. But I think there is a cost to being away. You do miss a lot of things. But I've also noticed on the flip side that I really do think absence makes the heart grow fonder. So when I'm home, I'm much more present. And I think that my kids really appreciate it when I am here, and I can, go to school events. And really, that's the flip side of it. Yes, you're gone maybe continuously for a week, if that's a schedule you choose. But when I'm home, I'm working hard on my other other businesses, but I have so much time freedom in a way that I never had before as a full-time doctor with Kaiser. I can go to school events now. I can go to the book fair. I can take my kids to their soccer games in a way that I could not reliably do in California.
I think being 1 week gone, but then 3 weeks home beats the hell out of 6 a.m. to 7 p.m. plus call on top of that. I mean, because truly, like, at these ages, it's school and sporting events. And if you're gone for that period of time consistently from 6 a.m. to 7 p.m., you're missing probably 95% of those items, as opposed to at most, 25%, which is a huge difference. What advice would you give to physicians transitioning from full-time traditional employment or full-time private practice to locum tenens work?
So I think it depends where you are in your career. I think that it's certainly possible for people straight out of residency to do locum tenens, and there could be some advantages to that. But I think everyone goes based on their own personal experience. But I really did benefit from being at the same location and building up a practice, and a busy practice, where I really got to grow into my own as a full urologist at one location. So I think I'm a little bit biased because that's what I went through. But I remember those first 2 years of being a urologist, it was a very steep learning curve. And I benefited from having a lot of colleagues around me in SoCal that I could bounce ideas off of, talk to them about case management, and operate with them in the OR. So I would say that on balance, I would really recommend that if someone can arrange that for themselves. I think when you're thinking about making the transition, the thing that is most important to all the roles that you're going to have is your skill as a surgeon or as a internal medicine provider or primary doc or what have you. So you have to be a well-trained doctor, because if you're not well-trained, it'll become evident in the roles that you have, because every single role you have follows you around. When you go and apply to any locums job, or you go for hospital credentialing anywhere, they're going to ask you, have you ever had issues? Have you ever been sued? Have you ever had major complications that have resulted in a liability? And the thing is, you want to be able to say that, here's my record, I'm well trained, I know what I'm doing, and I'm ethical, and these are the things that are going to allow you to practice very well no matter what you do. So I think making sure that those bases are covered. So I think it's a fallacy to think that locum tenens is going to be less qualified in any way than a full-time practicing physician. So I think we want to push away from that maybe stereotype and make sure that you're well qualified in all of the ways.
Great points. Even though we feel very well trained coming out of these rigorous residency programs, there is a lot that you learn when you get out and start practicing. And there's great educational value in having colleagues that you can chat with cases about, that you can have there to back you up. I am seeing more and more doctors who are calling me up when they're in their last year of residency, their last year of fellowship, and wanting to do this kind of out the gate. I think there's definitely some value in that. Shorter term contract, maybe 2 to 3 years, allows you to get up to speed, get confident, get that experience, and then also really kind of get yourself on a better financial footing.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And if you do decide to do locums out of the gate, you just have to sift through the options and make sure that you find one where you're going to have consistent case volume, because remember, you're going to need to submit your case logs for credentialing, become fully board certified.
That just changed in our specialty, and it sounds like urology might be doing the same. It used to be you'd have written boards and then oral boards, and they've completely kind of changed that up, where your oral boards are no longer just a couple of people in a hotel room that you go in and they go over cases. You're using your own cases, and it has to be at a site where you were there consistently up to a year. For someone who's looking at, I just want to do this immediately, I've seen a lot of trends among the boards themselves to say, no, you need to follow these patients. We want to see what you've done, their outcomes, and then we're going to quiz you about them. And then we need to be able to know, what did the scan show, and what did the surgery do? What did the path show? What did you do for that patient then? How do they do 3 months from now, 6 months from now? So it might be a whole other reason completely separate from this that it might not be necessarily available for all specialties. So certainly important to check with your board certification before making the leap. So excellent points.
Yeah.
So what I'd like to jump on to now, we touched on it a little bit earlier with the finances. What is the most common financial mistakes that you see our profession making?
I would say that the Probably the most common problem that I see young physicians making is that they don't think about the long terms. I think a lot of people just hope blindly that they're going to be at the financial position they want to be in 15 years or 20 years or 30 years when they're going to be ready to retire, but they don't really put the thought into actually mapping that out. You do have to have a clear picture of where you want to be and the type of lifestyle that you want, and you can extrapolate backwards from that. So if you want X number of dollars to spend in retirement, you have to have a means to generate that, right? If you're able to figure out where you want to go, then you can generate a likely financial pathway to get there. And if you're not on that path, then you're not going to get there. It's not, you can't suddenly wake up when you're 65 and plan on hanging up the stethoscope and say, whew, I'm glad I got it through my medical career. You have to plan for it in a way that I think some people don't. They just hope that if you make a consistent salary and don't live extravagantly, you're going to be fine. And then some people are surprised when they do get to retirement and they say, oh, I can't retire because I don't have enough saved, or I don't have enough in my 401k, or I don't have passive streams of income. So that's the most common problem when I talk to people. They haven't put the foresight into getting to where they want to be later on.
How much longer do you plan on practicing clinical medicine? Have you thought about that? With all of your excellent real estate investing, in your horizon, like how much longer do you think you want to keep practicing as a urologic surgeon?
So I think of it a little differently. So I would ideally practice for the rest of my life, but I want it to be completely optional after a certain point. So within 5 years, that's my timeline. I want to be completely independent of my medical income. Right now, what I've learned is that real estate investing and investing in general, I think of it's almost like you're loading up piggy banks. It's not necessarily the case that all of your investments are going to generate enough cash flow that you can replace clinical salary. You have to be very conscientious about that and pick the right investments that do generate day-to-day liquidity. So most investments are going to be sort of building up this piggy bank that you can trade around and grow and things like that. But for me, I want that investment corpus to generate enough income whereby my physician income is not necessary for a lifestyle. And, I would like to do that within the next 5 years, ideally. But in terms of practicing medicine, I love practicing medicine. I think the ability of physicians to heal and to guide people through illness and pathology is really unique. I find that incredibly satisfying. And I think it's hard to find that level of satisfaction, especially as a surgeon, in other parts of life. When you see a patient in the ER and they have an acute problem and you can fix them as a surgeon within an hour surgery or within even a bedside treatment in the ER, and they're thankful and everything goes great, that's a particular satisfaction and pleasure that I think is hard to replicate outside of medicine. So, I really value that. And, we train so hard to become physicians that I think it's a very great way of giving back to the world. So I see it as I'd love to practice for the rest of my life in some fashion. However, I want it to be optional very soon.
I do feel like there's almost an inverse relationship I've seen in a lot of doctors to their financial situation and how much they enjoy it. And it might be counter to what I think a lot of people would think, but actually the worse off they might be financially from a saving standpoint or a debt standpoint, they may feel a little bit more stressed in their job versus, like you're saying, hey, I want this clinical income in 5 years, to have it be completely optional, just something that we don't need to live off of, that I'm working on my own terms. As you've made that journey, has your feeling towards medicine changed? Like that kind of what the sentiment that you're describing right now, which is very positive towards what you do, has it always been like that? Or has that trended towards that direction as you've been able to have these additional real estate investment properties and different sources of income?
I think that's a really good question, and it has changed. So by the time I left full-time medicine, I was definitely burnt out. Not only was I burning the candle on both ends, being a full-time urologist, and I felt the satisfaction from medicine, but it was fewer and further between. As a full-time practitioner. A lot of my time, just as all physicians, it was spent on inbox management, responding to patient messages and making sure that results were followed up on, all of these things that are really unsatisfying.
And also frequently not compensated, right? Like that's the difference that you're probably seeing in locums. You're can be responding to that epic inbox, and if you're employed, you're not getting RVUs for that necessarily. I mean, you're not getting hourly payment in a lot of situations.
Right. So I don't have to deal with as much of that now as a locum tenens. It is different, and definitely going part-time with medicine has made me enjoy it more, 100%.
Well, I have to say, Daniel, I am so impressed with how you're utilizing locums in your career. Everybody has different life situations, but I think you have truly figured out a way to maximize what locum tenens can offer. I think the fact that you are present for your family so much of the time, the fact you're creating content for people like myself and other colleagues, the fact you're growing your own portfolio and then developing this a real estate syndicate, just super, super impressed.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I think that nothing's perfect, but I think continually trying to go towards a good balance in some way, whatever form that takes, is the way to go. And for me right now, locum tenens is playing a large role in that.
I'm curious to know what's next for you and the Darwinian Doctor, specifically, my favorite blog, and any upcoming projects or goals that you're excited about.
I'm really excited to expand serious real estate. So right now we have about 400 to 500 potential investors on the investment list, and a number of those, including yourself, invested in our first deal. But the more the merrier. It's like I'm really excited these days about the serious happy hours that I've been putting on, which are educational talks. And I've been trying to streamline things a little bit better and balance time expenditure between serious real estate and content that I produce, on TikTok and Instagram, trying to get the word out about all of these things that we've been talking about, and having that still serve the Darwinian Doctor blog, which I think is an important asset as well that I've grown over the years. So the main thing that I'm focused on is serious real estate for the next year. And I think that growing the investor base and bringing great investing opportunities to physicians is something that really fires me up. And that's what I'm most looking forward to.
Excellent. And we will have all of the links to your content and endeavors in our show notes, but can you tell us where listeners can find more about you and your work?
Sure. I think the omnipresent name that I exist on social media is probably the easiest way to find me, and that's the Darwinian Doctor.
Tell us where that name came from.
It really came from Charles Darwin and the theory of evolution, and my belief that life is about continual evolution. It's trying to continually evaluate things and make choices that are going to make your life better and the life of those around you. So I see life as a continual opportunity for evolution. That's where Darwinian came from. So like the alliteration. And on social media now, I sign off as Dan the Darwinian Doctor. So that's probably the easiest way to find me. I'm the Darwinian Doctor on TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, you name it. You can easily find me on my blog, thedarwiniandoctor.com, but you can also short circuit straight to serious real estate by going to seriousrealestate.com, and that's CEREUS.
Excellent. And then any final words of wisdom for listeners who are interested in combining locum tenens work with financial independence?
Yeah, I think locum tenens can be one of the most flexible and powerful ways to compartmentalize medicine into the part of your life that you want it to be. I think that the hardest thing about medicine right now is that we're ceding more and more autonomy and control to our employers, and locum tenens can be a great way of regaining a lot of control over the way that you practice medicine. It's one of many ways, but for me, I've really been happy.
Awesome. Thank you so much for your time. I really enjoyed chatting with you, and looking forward to following along as you continue to evolve as the Darwinian Doctor.
Thanks so much, Mark. Yeah, it was great talking to you.